Are you sure that the connection to the deceased is just an invention? And what if I tell you that scientists who have investigated this phenomenon have concluded that it is actually possible? Imagine a place where the boundaries between life and death disappear, where people return from the darkness with memories that cannot be explained by scientific means. This place even frightens the most skeptical researchers. Scientists who have dedicated their lives to studying the brain have come across facts that cannot be ignored. They spoke to people who survived clinical death, and their reports shed new light on our understanding of reality. They reported encounters with deceased relatives, experiences in which they left their bodies, and journeys to places that cannot be described in words. Bruce Greyson, a psychiatrist who spent more than 50 years studying the reports of people who have had experiences beyond death, says these stories are not mere coincidences. Today, we will look at the most shocking cases that could not even be explained by scientists. It all began at the very start of Bruce Greyson's career, when he had just started working as a psychiatrist in the emergency room. Like many young doctors, he was full of enthusiasm, believed in the power of science, and strictly followed medical protocols. His task was to help people by relying solely on proven knowledge. He could not imagine that one day he would be confronted with something that would radically change his ideas about consciousness, reality, and the true nature of human life. One day, a young student named Holly was brought into the emergency room. She was brought in unconscious, and it was obvious that she had attempted to take her own life. Pale, with slow breathing and a barely detectable pulse, she looked like a shadow of her former self. At that moment, Greyson did not think of anything mystical. It was just another severe case he had to deal with as a doctor. After assessing her condition, he decided to find out exactly what had happened and turned to Holly's friend, who had come with her in the ambulance. The conversation took place in a small office. The room was stuffy, the lamps were dimly lit, creating an atmosphere of disturbing sterility. Holly's friend looked frightened, and there was a sense of guilt in her eyes. She told him that Holly had been in deep depression for a long time and did not want to continue with her studies, but her parents had not given her any decision-making freedom. The girl felt cornered. During this conversation, there was a moment that would later become crucial. Greyson, who was in a hurry due to an emergency, had just eaten a little in the cafeteria. At one moment, he noticed that he had accidentally dropped a piece of food on his tie. The red stain from the sauce immediately stood out. But since he didn't have time to change, he simply buttoned his white coat and hid the mishap. At that time, it wasn't particularly important to him. A day passed. Holly regained consciousness. As usual, Greyson went to her room to assess her condition and have a conversation. She was downcast, as most patients are after a suicide attempt. But what happened next sent a chill down his spine. Holly looked at him with a perfectly clear gaze and said, "I know who you are. I saw you yesterday." These words sounded completely calm, without the slightest doubt. Greyson felt a cold shiver. He quickly checked the patient's file. No, she didn't regain consciousness throughout the entire day. How is that possible? You didn't regain consciousness, he asked with professional caution. But Holly's answer confused him even more. She began describing how she had seen him in another room, exactly in the office where he had spoken with her friend. She repeated details of their conversation, remembered the position he was sitting in and the words he had said. And then, as the final blow to his logic, she added, "You were wearing a red tie with a stain. You tried to hide it under your coat." Greyson could hardly believe his ears. How could she know that? No one had told her about it, and she couldn't have physically seen that moment. All her statements matched reality perfectly. For a few seconds, he just stood there, unable to respond. Hypotheses shot through his mind. Coincidence? A joke? Maybe her friend, with whom he had spoken, passed on some information? But even if that were the case, how could Holly have known about the stain on the tie? It was a completely insignificant, personal moment that no one but him could have known. This case completely unsettled him. The young psychiatrist, who had been trained according to strict scientific principles, had encountered something that defied all logic. He realized that if he told his colleagues about it, he would most likely just be laughed at. At best, no one would believe him. At worst, They would question his professional competence. At that point, he made a simple but important decision. He would forget it. Not mention it in the reports, not talk about it with colleagues. Dismiss this story as a strange coincidence to himself. But he couldn't forget it. This story became the starting point for his long journey into the world of near-death experiences. A world in which consciousness can exist outside the body and where reality is much more complex than it seems at first glance. As a scientist, he couldn't simply believe everything he was told. His father was a chemist and had taught him from childhood, only believe the facts. Even in his student years, Greyson came across the philosophical question, what if unconscious emotions control our behavior? He shared his thoughts with his father, but his father unexpectedly responded, why do you think we even have unconscious emotions? This answer shook Greyson. His father wasn't claiming that the unconscious didn't exist. He was simply demanding proof. At that moment, the young student understood. If he wanted to get closer to the truth, he needed real evidence. But how could he obtain it? How could he prove something that went beyond the limits of modern science? Greyson began collecting stories from people who had survived clinical death. Each one was unique, but all displayed strange recurring elements. The feeling of leaving the body, unusual clarity of consciousness, a journey through a dark tunnel, and encounters with deceased relatives. He realized that it was impossible to ignore these patterns any longer. One of the most astonishing cases involved a firefighter named Bill Harlan. He was a man with an iron will and years of experience in service, used to facing death head-on. Fire, smoke, collapses. He never imagined that he would stand at the threshold between life and something greater. While extinguishing a large fire, Bill and his colleagues made their way through the burning building. Suddenly, a loud crash, sparks flying, intense heat. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. The impact hit him directly in the head, and the world sank into silence. His colleagues rushed to rescue the injured, but Bill was left behind. His body appeared lifeless, and the doctors declared him dead. Yet, Bill remembered this moment entirely differently. He said that, at the moment his heart stopped, he suddenly found himself away from the scene. He saw his colleagues rushing through the room, trying to carry the injured out. He called to them, tried to get their attention, but no one heard him. Then it became clear to him that he was looking at his own body, lying between the rubble. But at the same time, he felt an astonishing sensation. He felt no pain, no heat, no difficulty breathing from the smoke. All he felt was calmness and curiosity. Then everything changed. It was as if he were being pulled into a dark room, feeling himself fall into a tunnel. It wasn't just darkness, but something deep, like an endless hole where there was neither fear nor time. He described it as a movement without effort, as though an invisible force was carrying him. In the distance, a light flickered, soft and shimmering, like the northern lights. The closer he got, the more images appeared around him. First, he saw scenes from his childhood, himself as a little boy playing in the yard, laughing with his parents, his school years. Everything shimmered like in a movie, but he didn't just see these moments. He relived them as if he were there again. Faces of people he had long forgotten appeared before him. Memories returned with incredible clarity. Even the most insignificant details were vivid and clear. And suddenly, among these images, a figure appeared. It was his father. He looked just as Bill remembered him from life. Strong, confident, with a kind but serious smile. His father came closer, and Bill felt an incredible sense of warmth and security, as if he were a child again, with the one who had always protected him standing beside him. What his father said was unexpected. You must return. Bill didn't understand why. Here, in this place, it was peaceful. There was no pain, no fear, no fire, no chaos. But his father was unwavering. He had to return. In the next moment, everything vanished, and Bill crashed back into his body. The first thing he felt was sharp pain. He heard sounds again, the wail of sirens, cries of people, the crackling of the fire. He smelled again, smoke, the scent of burning, ash. The fire hadn't disappeared. It was still here, in reality. He was alive again. When he was brought to the hospital, he told the doctor this story. The doctor just shook his head and sent him to a psychiatrist. It seemed like no one wanted to listen, like no one could believe him. But Bill knew that it was the reality. He hadn't just dreamed it or spoken deliriously. He had been there. He had seen. He had felt. He had perceived everything with extraordinary clarity. And this experience forever changed his perception of life and death. One of the main questions that always occupied him: why do those who have had similar experiences so often remain silent? Greyson began to study this phenomenon and listed several reasons. The first, the fear of seeming crazy. The inability to explain this scientifically inevitably leads to the question, what if it really was just a trick of the mind? But the problem is that these experiences are too clear, too logical, and too detailed to be an ordinary hallucination. Still, society has gotten used to considering such accounts as fantasy, or even worse, as symptoms of a mental disorder. People with a scientific mindset or professions that require a rational approach, doctors, soldiers, firefighters, know that if they openly talk about these experiences, they could be mocked, their reason questioned, or even their professional reputation jeopardized. The second reason lies in deep emotional trauma. Not everyone who experiences clinical death feels relief or joy about returning to life. Some, on the contrary, feel disappointment, dejection, and even anger. They say that on the other side, they felt peace, lightness, and complete acceptance, and when they returned, reality appeared gray, heavy, full of pain and limitations. One of the people Greyson spoke with said, "I was never afraid of death, but after this experience, I began to fear life." Those who have had such an experience can struggle for a long time to find a place for themselves. They feel they have changed, but they don't know how to live with it. The third reason is the feeling of shame. Some find this experience too personal to share with others. Perhaps at the moment of clinical death, they saw something that was only important to them: deceased relatives, forgotten childhood memories, hidden emotions. This experience becomes something sacred to them, something that cannot just be discussed. They fear that if they talk about it, their experience will lose its depth, and people will start searching for rational explanations or simply not understand it. But despite all these fears, there is something that unites them all. They are convinced that this experience was real, not a dream, not an illusion, not a chemical reaction of the dying brain, but something that, in its essence, is even more real than life itself. It is not just a memory, but an event that changes people forever. Bruce Greyson has collected more than 1,000 stories of people who experience clinical death. The deeper he delved into their narratives, the clearer the patterns became. People who were in a critical condition, where their brain should have ceased all activity, said that at that moment, either time slowed down or completely disappeared. Some told that they could observe the events around them with incredible clarity, but had no idea how much time had passed. For them, seconds in the state of clinical death could feel like a whole lifetime. Others described their experience as existence outside the usual flow of time. There was neither past nor future, only the boundless here and now. But the strangest thing was that their thought process became exceptionally clear. They were not only aware of themselves, but thought faster and more logically than in normal life. This contradicted everything that science knew about how the brain works. Because when the brain stops functioning, why would consciousness suddenly work better? Some patients said they were able to encompass multiple events simultaneously, as if their mind had expanded, as if they had gone beyond the boundaries of the physical body. Another amazing fact: many remembered scenes from their lives, even those they had long forgotten. These memories did not surface chaotically, like in a dream, but fell into a clear sequence, sometimes even in the form of a panorama, where the person could see their life as a whole. People claimed that they not only observed past events, but also felt the emotions they experienced at that time. Some felt as if they were reliving childhood memories, even sensing smells and sounds that had long vanished from their memory. But the most important, most astonishing realization was something else. Almost all of them said that they felt more alive than ever before. They reported that they had never experienced such clarity, freedom, and understanding. They felt lightness, peace, an absence of fear, as if they had suddenly gained complete freedom from all the limitations of the human body. And then Greyson asked a question that could not be ignored. If the brain truly creates consciousness, why does consciousness not only persist when the brain stops functioning, but also become stronger, clearer, sharper? This question tested traditional science and destroyed the firmly established notion that the human mind is merely a product of neural processes. Perhaps consciousness is more than just the work of the brain. Perhaps it can exist independently of the body. But if that is the case, what happens to us after death?